Hey everybody, Mr. Duker back again, and today we're doing a not so simplified look at Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor is probably one of my favorite things to teach, and there's a lot of stuff that I'm going to cover here, so if you're looking for something quick and easy, probably not. This is going to be a pretty in-depth presentation on Pearl Harbor, what happened and why, aftermath, step by step. Very interesting. I think I'm all ready. I'm all decked out in my Hawaiian gear and ready to go. So there's a lot to cover. I want to jump into it right away because Pearl Harbor is important, super important, probably one of the most important days in U.S. history, and there's a good reason for it. So Pearl Harbor, right? We got to rewind a little bit and see why Japan attacked the United States in the first place. So, if you remember, since 1931, Japan had been at war in China, trying to get their land and resources to grow their empire. Japan is a small volcanic archipelago with just a small island chain, and it's very resource poor. To run its military war machine in order to get more land and get richer, Japan needed resources like iron, rubber, oil, especially to grow and attack their neighbors. China had a lot of that. Inconveniently, they're kind of neighbors. So they have been at war against China since 1931. Very bloody, very long, drawn-out conflict. China is not communist, remember, at the time, and a very close ally to the United States, and we're not happy with Japan waging war against an ally of us. But the United States is also neutral and isolationist, and we don't want to get involved. We're dealing with the Great Depression at this time. So a lot of protesting, which Japan just ignores because it's not, they don't need to listen to us. And so as this escalates, finally, FDR will do something of consequence, and what he does is he cuts off all of the American oil supplies to Japan. Japan was attacking China with American gasoline. So Japanese ships and tanks and planes were using American oil to attack China, which is kind of a conflict of interest. So we basically cut off the oil supply. However, for Japan, this was like the last straw, right? America was probably the only other power in the Pacific that could threaten their expansion, and right now the United States was kind of just turning the other cheek to Japan's aggression. But Japan viewed this as a hostile act. To Japan, this was, in their view, a declaration of war. Without oil, their military can't function. They can't continue the battle in Japan. They can't go and get more resources. This is an important thing in Japan's view. And so as soon as that oil is cut off, they start making plans to attack the United States. And relations between the two, which were not good, sour very quickly. And eventually it seems like war is going to be inevitable between Japan and the United States. The question is just kind of when, where, how, but it's probably coming at this point. And why did Japan attack us? It all comes down to oil, like it always seems to. They went to war over oil and to get back to the United States. So here's a map, but it's also a timeline that kind of shows how aggressively Japan had been expanding in the years leading up to World War II. So the red home islands are Japanese home territory, and as you can see, as you go down the color bar, they are expanding and becoming more and more aggressive, building up their empire. So first, war in Korea and Manchuria, which is the purple areas. You can see the yellows, they start to expand into more mainland China. I guess 1939, orange is an off year for Japan. Not much territory conquered at that point, but you can see then 1940, 42, the purples. They go and take the Philippines, they take what is now Vietnam and Indochina. They're starting to threaten Australia as well with Indonesia. So Japan, very aggressive, and they have carved out quite a large empire for themselves, much bigger than anything Germany had conquered. because you got the vastness of the Pacific Ocean, which is kind of separating everything, which is also why they really need oil. Think of all the ships that have to travel back and forth to resupply and send troops and bring resources back. Japan really needed oil to keep growing and keep these possessions under their control. So there's some advantages to this from Japan's point of view, right? First of all, if they were to attack the United States first, right, the idea is that maybe they could deal a blow so big to the U.S. may be unable to stop further Japanese aggression. They could cripple the United States Navy and make them kind of impotent, unable to fight back. So that's kind of an advantage. Yeah, like I said, can't stop them from going in and taking over the rest of Asia. The American Navy is kind of the only thing stopping them at this point. England's Navy is there, but they're more focused on Europe at this kind of time, and they're not as big a threat as the Pacific Fleet of the United States. And best case scenario, you could cripple the Navy, or you could beat them so badly the United States may just surrender and quit before the war kind of even begins. Now that's not going to happen, but in Japan that would be like the best case scenario, right? If we could just beat the US so badly, they may not even fight back, and then we got free reign to just go and conquer everything we want in Asia. Again, not happening, but some people in Japan thought maybe that would be kind of worth the risk. There's disadvantages as well, but we'll get to that. So now that they decide to attack the United States, and now that there's some advantages to that, they have to start planning the strike. And so the guy they put in charge is this guy. His name is Isoroku Yamamoto. Try saying that 3 times fast, kind of a fun name. Yamamoto was probably the head admiral in Japan at the time, probably their best admiral. One reason is he went to school in the United States. Yes, but the years before World War I and after, Japan has sent a lot of its students all around the world to go and study in the best colleges and, you know, intern in the best businesses and just get knowledge from all the best schools and institutions in the world to learn as much as they could from other countries, then come back home and teach their own people what they had learned from abroad. So Yamamoto actually went to school in the United States Navy War College when we were friendly, and so he was kind of trained by Americans in naval warfare. And Yamamoto is probably the best guy to plan this attack. Yamamoto went to school in the United States, has friends in the United States. He knows the U.S. well because he lived in it. And he knows this is not an easy task. He does not agree with this attack. He doesn't think it's a good idea. But with Japan being the way it is, once he's given a mission, it's up to him to orchestrate it to the best of his ability. He knows the United States is maybe not strong now because of the Great Depression, but because so many people are out of work and so many factories are shut down. But he said the United States was like a sleeping giant, right? If we were to wake the United States up, they have tons of workers and resources and factories. They could just make and produce more weapons than Japan could ever hope to sink or destroy in a war. If war with the United States comes, Japan will lose because the United States can just make way more weapons than Japan can ever hope to fight back against. That's why he thinks it's not a good idea. But again, no one asked his opinion. They just asked him to do this, right? So he's going to plan the strike, but he knows it does not sit well with him. However, Yamamoto is also quite the gambler. He had a reputation in college for being an expert poker player, and being a gambling man, he kind of sees the strike at Pearl Harbor is a big gamble, right? High risk, high reward. It's dangerous, no doubt, but roll the dice. Maybe Japan comes out lucky, and maybe they could really weaken, or, if they hit the jackpot, get the United States to quit before this war even begins. It's a long shot, but being a gambler, he's not averse to long odds, and he's going to roll the dice with this attack. So, just a little breakdown here of kind of the the differences and the strengths of the two sides. So here's a chart I made with some information I found showing the size of the Navy of these two sides leading up. And as you can see, Japan actually has a much bigger Navy than does the United States. Japan had been growing their Navy quite a bit after World War I, and the United States just kind of had theirs not linger, but they weren't worried about it too much building it up. So Japan has a strength in carriers, which can be incredibly important in World War II. Japan has 10 aircraft carriers at the time. The United States only has 3. Battleships were the main weapon at the time before World War II begins. That was the capital ship. You know, you measured your Navy on how many battleships you had, not carriers. A little even there. Japan has a slight advantage. Heavy cruisers, like maybe think of it like a mini battleship, right? Not as large, but still kind of capable. They have a lot more of those than us. Next one, it would make sense since Japan has more aircraft carriers, they have more aircraft, about 550 to a little under 400 or 300 for the United States. Destroyers are smaller ships like escorts and sub-hunters, things like that. And again, Japan's got a little over 100, the United States a little underneath, a little more even there. But again, Japan actually has the bigger Navy at the time. Keep in mind, the United States Navy also was split between Atlantic and Pacific fleets. So this is just the Pacific Fleet for the United States, but that was where most of these ships were because they saw Japan as kind of a bigger threat at the time. Now, to plan this attack, it's not going to be easy. Hawaii is pretty far from Japan, and so they're going to do their research. They're going to do their homework. Japan's very smart, and they sent spies to Hawaii in the months leading up to Pearl Harbor to just kind of spy on what was going on and get a better understanding of how to plan the attack. And Japan is pretty smart because Hawaii is a big tourist destination, of course, back then. And so what they would do is they would send these spies and they would book them hotels outside of Pearl Harbor, right? Get the top floor, and these guys would go in there with their binoculars and a notebook, and they had a bird's eye view of Pearl Harbor from their hotel window, and they would just observe and take notes and write down all the routines of the Navy. What time do sailors usually wake up? What time do they go to bed? What ships have left Pearl Harbor? What ships have entered? Kind of just learning the routines of the Navy to plan the best time to strike, and they did it all with room service, right? Not too bad. They booked flights. You could fly around the islands and take an aerial tour because Hawaii is pretty beautiful. So they would do that. They would book these flights and take them around the island. Hey, could we swing by Pearl Harbor again? That is really kind of cool. Oh yeah, but take pictures to take home and show your family. Oh great. So they would take aerial photographs of Pearl Harbor. So they had pretty accurate maps of where the facilities were located, where the ships were docked, and we gave them those flights. We gave them that bird eye view. Also, they sent home postcards that you could buy from gift shops that also had maps of Pearl Harbor. It had a lot of the battleships on these postcards, so they could kind of pick out and have detailed information on what ships, what they look like, so they could pick them out from far away. And so very smart with planning this attack because Hawaii is very open, being a tourist destination. While they're doing this, there is a problem they realize. Pearl Harbor has one advantage for the United States or a disadvantage for Japan. Pearl Harbor is very shallow. That's one reason why the Navy picked it to be the headquarters for the Pacific Fleet. Because the water is shallow, it was thought that would protect them from attack from torpedoes, right? Basically, a torpedo is kind of like an underwater missile. You could fire them from submarines or from planes, but when planes would drop a torpedo, because it's a big, heavy metal cylinder, they drop in the water quite a bit before they get, they level out and become buoyant and run underneath the water. But Pearl Harbor is so shallow, any torpedoes would just smack on the bottom of the harbor and explode. So you really couldn't use the best weapon to sink ships against Pearl Harbor. Ships were kind of invulnerable to torpedoes, is what the Navy thought. And Japan knew their torpedoes would not work either because it was too shallow. If you can't fix that, this attack isn't going to work. You got to figure out a way to make torpedoes work in Pearl Harbor, and this is a big sticking point for Japan. They got to solve this problem, and they do. They find out very easily. Someone had a good idea. If we just take a little wooden box, these little wooden fins, and if you just attach them to the back of a regular torpedo, it will make them more buoyant. They'll be a little more floaty, and they won't sink as much. And so just a simple wooden box fixes the torpedo problem. Now their best weapon will work, no problem in Pearl Harbor. We didn't know and thought the shallow water would still protect us, but Japan checks off that box, no problem, keep going. So now that they've spied and now that they fixed the torpedo problem, they're ready to launch the attack. So on November 26, 1941, the Japanese task force leaves Tokyo Bay for Pearl Harbor. We know because we also had spies in Tokyo, in hotels, doing the same thing, spying on and keeping track of their navy. So that morning, our guys wake up, and the fleet, which was there the night before, disappeared in the middle of the night. So they all left for some reason. So we knew they were on the move. The question just was, where were they going? Were they going to China, to the Philippines, Australia, Alaska? I mean, they could go anywhere. Where are they going? Well, if you look at the map on the slide, that is the route they took. And so they pretty much went straight, took a beeline east, heading out almost straight and level as you can see, and didn't turn south until they were right over Pearl Harbor. Now, you know the quickest way between 2 points is a straight line, and they did not take the quickest way. They went out of their way to go to Hawaii. Here's my mouse. There you go, which would be right here. So why did they do that? Well, because the quickest way between 2 points is a straight line, there's a lot of shipping traffic if you were to connect those dots right there. Can I do that? No. So you got a lot of fishing, trading, cruise ships there, and if they had taken the straight way, they would have been spotted. It's pretty hard to hide 6 aircraft carriers heading towards Hawaii. Where are they going? What are they doing? And so they don't want to be spotted. They want to keep that element of surprise. And so by taking that kind of straight eastern approach, there's not a lot of shipping traffic there. And so they knew they would be undetected because there's just not much travel going on in that sea route. And then by turning south right above Hawaii, same thing, not a lot of ships traveling in those waters to keep that element of surprise. Now again, we knew that relations with Japan weren't great. We knew that war was probably likely, but no one in the United States really expected a sneak attack against Pearl Harbor, and no one expected an attack so soon. Yes, we were wary of Japan, not of their navy. We were worried about sabotage, Japanese spies. There's a large Japanese immigrant population that lives in Hawaii, and they would work in all sorts of businesses. Many of them worked on base, and the fear was that they may be loyal to Japan and that they could sabotage our military by, I don't know, planting bombs, cutting gas lines, I don't know, maybe putting sugar in the gas tank of a couple of airplanes and ruining the engines. But we were worried about Japanese sabotage more than Japanese bombs. So what we would do at Pearl Harbor is take all of our equipment and we would basically line them up, in big groups to make them easier to watch and to protect. But the result was, by bunching everything up, we also made everything an easier target when the Japanese attack. So here you can see this is what they call Battleship Row. We took all the battleships and literally lined them up in a row so they would be easier to kind of keep track of and guard and watch. But again, that made it easier targets when Japan attacked. So for example here, say you're a Japanese pilot, right? And you're aiming for that middle ship and you miss. Well, no worries, right? Because you got a good chance of hitting the ship to the left or to the right. They are parked in like sardines in a can, so close to one another. And so this ends up backfiring against the United States. We weren't really on a war footing. We were more worried about spies at home. So now that Japan is steaming towards the United States, This is an actual photograph of Japanese planes on the carriers getting ready to launch against Pearl Harbor early in the morning, December 7th. And Japan, again, is very smart. They knew this attack could only work if they had achieved the element of surprise. And so they had one more trick up their sleeve to figure out if the attack was a go, to see if they had achieved surprise. They would listen that morning to Hawaiian radio. And guess what they heard? Luau music. Right? They were close enough they could actually listen in on Hawaiian radio stations, and they heard luau music, which meant green light, right? Everything's a go. They don't know an attack is coming, and so they gave a code word out over the radio, Tora, 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 which is Japanese for tiger, tiger, tiger. But that was the code word for complete surprise achieved. Go ahead and launch the attack. They knew if we had caught wind of this, the radio would not be playing luau music. It would be like emergency broadcast stations, all military personnel, please report to your base, curfew for all civilians. It would be helter-skelter, but that's not what was on the radio because we were asleep. We had no idea. And so Japan knew they could kind of catch us napping here with listening to the radio. So the planes are being launched, and now the attack is going to begin. Here are some, I think, dive bombers also on the ships, but early in the morning, getting ready to attack at Pearl Harbor. There's another plane, a Zero, taking off to go and hit the American base. Now, we actually had one more chance to try and stop or be prepared for this attack. It just so happened that radar was kind of a new invention at the time, and we actually had a radar station that had just been built in Hawaii. And that morning, there were a couple guys manning the station who actually picked up on the radar screen a huge force of planes flying to Hawaii, which is a little strange, and that's a little abnormal. So these guys radioed it back to base. Hey, on our scopes, we're picking up a lot of planes, something flying to Hawaii. Do you have any idea what this is? They tell them to wait for a second. They check their records. Oh, don't worry. There's a flight of B-17s, that's the bomber on the screen there, coming in from California, and they're due to arrive any minute. They must be early. Don't worry. That's normal. It's expected. They're just B-17s. Oh, okay. No big deal. The guys turn off the radar. They go back into town and go have like an early breakfast or something. And that one last chance was missed. But yeah, no, that was not B-17s on the radar. That was the Japanese strike force heading to Hawaii, and we kind of ignored it. So now, not much else we can do. So the attack is going to come, and the attack came in two waves, two separate times. They sent planes to come and attack Pearl Harbor. And the main target was those battleships on Battleship Row. Carriers aren't quite the weapon they will become, but that's changing as we speak, right? But the battleships were the targets, and that's what they're trying to hit here at Pearl Harbor. This is a photograph taken from a Japanese pilot in the beginning minutes or seconds of the attack. So you can see clearly Battleship Row because all the ships are lined up. In the back, you can see some of the airfields at Pearl Harbor. I think Wheeler Airfield is what it was called. It's already been hit. It's on fire. But we know this is early because none of the ships have been hit or have exploded yet. Or have they? Look at the water, and what can you see? Need a drink. Ripples. Why are there ripples in the water? Bombs or torpedoes have been dropped pretty close to those ships. So you can see the attack is underway. If you also look, here's my pointer, you can see streaks in the water. What are those? Torpedoes on their way to hit these ships. And if you also look, you can see one of the ships right here. The water is a little darker. That ship looks like it's already been hit and is spilling oil into the waters at Pearl Harbor. But again, had this picture been taken even just a couple seconds later, it probably would look very different because a lot of these ships would be up in smoke and there'd be a lot of fires and just carnage everywhere. This is still pretty early in the attack. Oh, this is always messed up. I forgot. So the attack began right before 8 o'clock in the morning on Sunday, December 7th, 1941. Not an accident. This was planned. Japan could attack at any time, any day, and they specifically picked December 7th, 1941, Sunday morning. Why? Well, think for a second, right? You got a lot of young sailors in the Navy at this time stationed in Hawaii. What do you think you would be doing if you were in Hawaii on a Saturday night? Cheers. Going out, having fun, drinking, right? Well, okay, if that's the case, what are you doing on Sunday morning? A little bit of a hangover, a little bit of sleepy, and they knew from watching that usually Sunday mornings were a little lax in the Navy, and so 8 o'clock, you'd have daylight, but that would also be kind of literally catching us asleep, as you know, you didn't really. There's no urgency Sunday mornings in the Navy before Pearl Harbor, so that was the plan. And literally, when the first bombs and torpedoes hit, a lot of sailors were still asleep in their bunks on their ships or base, had no idea they were being attacked. This is a photograph of the West Virginia. All the battleships are named after states. And so here's a Virginia on fire, burning. It's a little low in the water, it looks like, and I think we'll see that picture again. Oh, so when the attack began, they were actually able to radio back to the United States. There's no internet yet, but with telegraphs and radio, you could still send messages pretty quickly. So people in the United States actually knew the attack was happening as it was going down. However, very famously, the guy behind the radio only had time to get out the simplest of message. So this is what he was able to send out: air raid, Pearl Harbor, this is no drill. And that's all people back home knew about for quite a while, right? Who's attacking us and why, and has anyone been hit? Has anyone been killed? They didn't know quite yet. They knew an attack was happening, but they didn't know the specifics. There's that picture again of the Virginia. It's been colorized now. It looks a little different, but you can see, yeah, it's definitely sinking or settling to the bottom of the harbor. It's not going to sink completely because Pearl Harbor is too shallow for that, but it is in bad shape. This is the USS Shaw. This was I think a destroyer. There's a lot of other ships besides battleships there, but it looks like it took a direct hit and exploded as well. This is the California. It is sinking in the water, and you can see it's starting to list. So as the ships take on water, they can sometimes roll over if they become unbalanced. I think the California does end up rolling over, unfortunately trapping a lot of the guys inside. But you can see a lot of men on the deck, those white specks or sailors getting ready to jump an abandoned ship. And you can see ships in the background have been hit. The sky is very smoky, full of smoke. And the water, you can see, I don't know if that is debris. I don't know if those are sailors trying to swim to safety. Many of them would just jump in the water and try and swim to land. It's kind of hard to tell, but that is the California at Pearl Harbor. Here's a photo from a Japanese pilot flying over Battleship Row. And again, they knew exactly where each ship was. They knew what each ship looked like from all their planning. But again, you can see, I mean, how can you miss as a Japanese pilot? Not only are they single file, but they're like doubled up with the way they were anchored there. So all that dark water is oil leaking out from the battleships. The sailors had to swim through that. It would float on top of the water, and oil burns. So sometimes they had to swim through flaming, oily water to try and get to safety. It's not a good place to be. It just so happened that the radar people were correct, and there were a flight of B-17s coming in from California, and they arrive in the middle of the attack. And so these planes who had no armament had to try and make emergency landings at Pearl Harbor during the attack. And I think almost all of the planes were destroyed, either trying to land or once they were on the ground. But here's one of those B-17s, took a hit, ain't much of it left. But yeah, they actually were showing up and tried to land in the middle of the fight. Can't talk about Pearl Harbor without talking about the USS Arizona. And so, of course, the Arizona, probably the most famous ship to be hit at Pearl Harbor. The Arizona was hit pretty early on, 8:06, so less than 10 minutes afterwards. And it got a lucky hit, or unlucky, from a Japanese dive bomber. It was not a torpedo, it was a bomb that hit the ship. And so these battleships are very heavily armored on the sides, because that's where they expected to get hit from opponents when fighting other battleships. But the very top of the deck was a little lightly armored, and so that's where this armor-piercing bomb hit. Not only that, it hit in the worst place possible. It hit the Arizona in the forward ammunition magazine. So these battleships are floating powder kegs. Not only are they full of lots of oil, but lots of gunpowder and high explosives to fire those huge shells in those guns. And so this bomb landed right in the forward magazine where all the explosives were kept. And the Arizona, one bomb, one hit, total loss. Survivors said the ship actually jumped out of the water. It kind of split the ship into two. Explosion was so big, it blasted men off of the decks of ships nearby into the water and instantly killed many of the guys on board as well. The Arizona is a total loss and quickly sinks to the bottom of the ocean, where it still, of course, is there today. Here is, I think this is also the Arizona as it is sinking, and you can see many men lost their lives in the ship. This is an interesting photograph because you can see just how powerful that explosion was. This is the ship's tower. This is part of the ship's superstructure. Giant, huge steel armor plate and beams and construction. And you can see here the tower is bending in on itself, right? If you look in the little, the walkway in the middle, right? Let me get my mouse, here we go. See how it's straight? Well, normally if the ship was in one piece, this tower should be straight all the way across. You should just be able to walk from left to right and have no problems. But the tower is bent, just like you would crease a piece of paper. The explosion bent the tower, and it's starting to sink like that. I mean, crazy powerful explosion to bend all that steel like it was a piece of paper, but it crumpled quite a bit. So, two waves of attacks. There actually was a third wave planned, but the Japanese luckily did not send that. So, first attack came right after 8 o'clock in the morning. The second wave came probably about an hour or two later. And there was a third wave of planes gassed up, armed, and ready to go, which they could have launched a little later in the afternoon, probably around 1 or 2. Yamamoto decided against it. Luckily for us. According to Japan's point of view, there was very little reason to send more men into harm's way. In their view, this was a complete victory, mission accomplished. All the battleships had been hit. Every target seems to be on fire. What are you going to do? Send more men to blow up ships that are already sunk? There was nothing left, Japan thought, to attack. So why risk more men to blow up stuff that's already been destroyed? Additionally, the United States would be very ready and waiting for them now, and so they could expect a lot more losses. There's no reason to risk the men. Mission accomplished, and so they just turn around and go back home. Lucky they did, because they actually missed quite a bit. Yeah, a lot of the ships were destroyed, but Japan missed some very important infrastructure elements that really could have changed World War II, right? So a lot of support facilities that had like spare parts and supplies were missed. The submarines and the repair depots were also missed. So even though the battleships were destroyed, we still had a pretty capable submarine force that could resist and fight back in the early days of the war. Because the repair docks were missed, many of these ships, even though the damage is bad, will actually get repaired and sent back out to fight in the war. Of course, not the Arizona. But most importantly is they missed the oil depot. They missed the gasoline, right? Had those been hit, it took years to build up a big oil supply at Pearl Harbor. Basically, had one bomb touched those and had those all gone off, you could have fixed all the ships at Pearl Harbor. You could have built more ships to go and station there. But without gasoline, they would have been marooned. They wouldn't have been able to leave. And had that oil been hit, I've read it would have taken maybe 2 or 3 years to stockpile and resupply enough oil in Hawaii to start fighting back against Japan. So you could have really delayed the outcome of the war by a huge amount had the gasoline station been hit. But they missed it, and so we were able to fight back because, again, our oil supply was still intact. Really, really dodged a bullet there. But most importantly, American aircraft carriers were not destroyed because they weren't there at Pearl Harbor. Luckily for us, they were away on other missions. Remember, we only had 3 from that little chart at the beginning. And Pearl Harbor shows just how important carriers are going to be in this war. It wasn't Japanese battleships that sunk us at Pearl Harbor. It was Japanese aircraft carriers. And now quickly, I mean, as of right now, your carriers are the most important ships in your fleet, and that is going to give you the ability to fight back. I mean, as you'll see in World War II, it's the war in the Pacific is a war of aircraft carriers. And luckily, the American ones are still in one piece. So that means even though there's only 3, and even though the battleships are mostly destroyed, we still have some ability to fight back. It's limited, but to try and slow down and hinder Japan in the early days of this war. Had the carriers been hit, again, it would have really dragged things out while we repair or build new ones, but it gives us like a puncher's chance to try and fight back in the beginning of this war. Japan was very salty about this. They were really hoping a carrier or 2 might be there, but just kind of dumb luck. They were away on other missions, and so they were missed. But again, carriers are the most important weapon during this war, and we still have our 3, so we can put them to good use. There is one of the carriers, I think Lexington or the Concorde, I can't remember, but we don't have many, and that's one of them right there. So you add it all up. Pearl Harbor, 23,000 Americans killed in the attack. About half of those probably on the Arizona. Civilians were killed too. The Japanese would strafe and attack some of the people living in Honolulu, the city nearby Pearl Harbor. Also, you have to remember, we're trying to shoot down these airplanes, so the guys that could get to their gunner stations were putting a lot of lead into the air to try and shoot these planes down. And when you fire a bullet into the sky, it has to come down somewhere. It just doesn't go off forever. And a lot of those bullets actually end up raining down on Honolulu. And unfortunately, some people got caught and were killed by all this hail of bullets coming down on them from Pearl Harbor. There's interesting photos you can find of like cars that just get shredded from all these anti-aircraft fire falling down on them. So civilians were killed too. 5 battleships got sunk. You sunk my battleship. And 188 aircraft destroyed, mostly on the ground. Very few got into the air, though a couple did and were able to try and fight back, but very limited in what they can do. Japan's losses, very, very light. Only 55 pilots killed for 29 aircraft destroyed. How does that work out? Well, some of those planes were like 2 or 3 seaters. So if you shot down one plane, there'd be more people there. But again, compared to, apples, oranges, it's not even close. Japan, very light losses. In the United States, very, very heavy. Very lopsided is what I'm trying to say with the casualties here. A big victory for Japan on paper. However, there are consequences to this, right? Before Pearl Harbor, it was a little iffy on what the United States was going to do with World War II. England, Germany, France, right? They've been fighting already, and the U.S. is still kind of staying on the sidelines, not super involved yet. After this, there's no doubt that we're going to go into the war, and we end up declaring war the very next day on Japan. Luckily, because they were allies, Hitler then declares war on us, so we declare war on him. Whatever, but we are now fully into World War II, and the sleeping giant is awake, right? The damage at Pearl Harbor is bad, make no mistake, but it's not the crippling blow that Japan was hoping it would be. And it will take time to repair those ships. It will take time to get back on our feet. But the United States is angry. They are pissed. How dare Japan do this to a country at peace with them? In the morning, a sneak attack. Incredibly angry. And spoiler alert, but if you know your history, the United States will get Japan back tenfold by the time this is all said and done. But there is no way we're going to quit. There's no way we're going to surrender. The nation has a cause. The nation is angry, and they want revenge. Japan is going to pay for what they did. And whatever the price, the United States is in this, jumping in both feet first. Right? Yeah, whatever. We're in this war now. So, and Japan better watch out. Additionally, oh, is that it? I guess that's it. Yeah, but the Great Depression is over, and right away people put back to work, and we're going to start making all those weapons to win this war, and like I said, pay Japan back. All right, so I told you it's detailed, but hey, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on here. So hopefully that helped a little bit. I can't say that was super simplified, but I hope that was easy to follow, and you have a better understanding now of why Pearl Harbor is a big deal, how it affected the United States, why it happened in the first place, and why it was such a big deal in 1941, and even such a big deal today still. All right, so thanks for watching, and I got another follow-up video I might do on this. We'll see if you're interested. But thanks for watching. I appreciate it. I hope this helps you with your learning in your classes. All right, Mr. Duker, catch you later.